Thank you all for attending our very first Commonwealth Conversations. I'm so excited for this initiative. We are really, really thrilled to be able to reach out across the Commonwealth and be able to talk to wonderful progressive candidates and elected officials that Laura also happens to be friends with, and kind of expand our realm and all get to know each other as we go through this 2021 election cycle. Just to go over a quick a few Zoom protocols. You are more than welcome to put your screen on. We love seeing all your faces. So yeah, don't feel obligated to keep those screens off. We are recording this event just so we can publish it later. And so you also have a record of how fantastic and fun this was. And we are encouraging for all of our attendees to be able to type questions into the chat. We've received a few questions through our Jot form, but the last 10 minutes we're going to be reserving as a Q&A for questions from all of you. So as the event goes on, please feel free to type those questions into the chat and I will go ahead and get those answered for you later. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hillary. I'm Laura's campaign manager and I'll be moderating the event. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And with that, I'm going to introduce our absolutely wonderful Center County Democratic Jury Commissioner candidate, Laura Shadle, as well as Allegheny County Councilperson Bethany Hallam. Take it away.
All right. So I guess I'll kick it off as the candidate. So my name is Laura Shadle. I believe I know everyone here. But for those of you who I don't know, so I am the Center County Democratic Jury Commissioner currently. I've also been heavily involved in progressive activism and democratic politics in Center County, Pennsylvania, and broadly Pennsylvania for the past decade. And so I am running this year, and I think this is perfect to kick off Women's History Month. I want to first highlight that I have an all-woman team, and we, that definitely speaks to our efficiency. But I also want to
she's starting
to say
conversation.
I'm sorry, I heard some background. But I also just want to speak to a little bit about what my candidacy is. I was appointed into this position last year, about a year ago, so a month before COVID hit. And one thing I've been, we say that like this has really been a trial by fire, no pun intended or pun intended. But one thing that I've been able to bring to this office is really, aside from being one of the youngest people and certainly the first LGBT person ever elected or brought to this office, is that I have really been able to garner my experience within this office, and I've been handling it well. And I also want to continue that, but also I bring a lot of innovation into the office. We're really creating a lot of more efficient means of carrying out the jury process. But my major focus is bringing all of my past activist efforts and all the values that I hold and bringing that into kind of focusing on equity within the judicial system within Center County. And that is something you have to constantly be on daily to make sure that that's being carried through. And a big part of that that's overlooked is the jury process. And so I am one of the main administrators over that. And so this is what I want to continue to be doing the work for this. And so I am really grateful for everyone's support. And, just to add to this, I'm very grateful for my team, Hillary and Aaron, and for this series that we're doing here. This is bigger than one position. This is about showing that we have a strong coalition of progressive, diverse candidates and elected officials across Pennsylvania who are really the people who are taking the lead and getting the work done now. This is what this series is going to show. And I didn't think there was a better way to kick off Women's History Month than with somebody like one of the most one of the strongest outspoken women that I know in office and in PA politics, like Bethany Hallam. So Bethany, please introduce yourself. I couldn't do you any more justice.
Well, that was a great introduction as it was. Thank you for that. I'm Bethany Hallam. I am the Allegheny County Council member at large, which means that I am on our legislative body in Allegheny County. And because I'm the at-large member, I represent all 1.2 million people in Allegheny County. I am also a formerly incarcerated person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder, which is really what has shaped a lot of my perspectives coming into my role on county council, and is one of the reasons why I'm so excited even just learning about the jury commissioner role. Before you were a jury commissioner, I had never even heard of the role because we don't have that in Allegheny County. So just your candidacy alone and you holding the position currently has educated me a lot on how different counties treat their criminal justice system and how different counties have different roles that have influence over it. So I'm just so excited to be here, especially on this inaugural episode. I am a big fan of local elections. Anyone that knows me knows that that's always my focus. Twice a year, every year, we have elections, and most important are the ones that usually the fewest people vote in the odd year elections. And in Allegheny County, in our primary elections is when most of our races are decided. And in 2019, we had a 17% turnout. And so I'm really hoping that now with mail-in voting, 2021 is going to be the year where people are really starting to turn out and participate in our local elections. And that's what I'm most excited about.
Very cool. And Bethany, you'll love this. I don't know if you heard this on my kickoff or any other things, but one of my sayings, since, you and I are both major proponents of like the local elections and the odd year elections, not just because we run in them, but because of the importance. And like what we have made very clear is that, if we had not been successful in Pennsylvania in these odd year elections, the 2020 election results would not have happened. And I know I saw you on the news, like on national news, like actually talking about some of the election procedures on, I think, CNN or MSNBC. And it was, you and Malcolm Kenyatta and Fetterman. That really is true. And then, of course, all of our court races too, like so much came down to the courts. I definitely have a saying that I know that you will definitely empathize with, but I say, let the odd years be good to the oddballs. Because that's us.
Right, huh?
Well, because we're not we're not conventional. I think in our history, even before being in office, we were not considered people who should be, the candidates or be in the political spotlight because we were maybe too outspoken about certain things or had a certain past, and we just had to kind of take a sledgehammer to all of that and say, no, this is not, this former status quo, even within the Democratic Party, has not been doing well by the people that we want to serve or represent. It just hasn't. And we actually have to be the people who really come in and take, and I know you were one of the main people who did that. Well before I even considered office, I knew you when we were both just taking state party positions. And that's how we met.
And I think that's a great point too, that something that someone told me a long time ago is that if you're sick of every time you go to vote and you don't see a candidate on your ballot that looks like you or stands for what you stand for or has the same experience that you have or motivates you to want to vote, then maybe you should run for office. And so that's something that has stuck with me all throughout this. And I really feel like you and your candidacy embody that. Like, we're sick of voting for the same old people over and over again. And if we aren't willing to put ourselves out there and run, how are we ever supposed to change the system unless we change it from within?
Right. No, absolutely. And I know one of the things, and I take that with me anytime I am recruiting somebody to get involved, whether it be activism, whether it be within the party, whether it be running for office. With my candidacy specifically, something that's very critical within the judicial system here in Center County is that the jury commissioners are the people who administer the entire jury selection process. So we don't, leading up to selection day, that's when we heavily work with like the attorneys and the district attorney. But before that, we run everything. And we need to make sure that we are constantly aware of explicit and implicit biases, like towards women, given that we deal with sexual assault cases, towards women, towards minorities, to people with disabilities. This needs to be at the forefront of what we're looking at when we're dealing with jurors and when we're speaking with jurors and actually narrowing this pool. And that is something that I don't know if it's really been at the, really been championed before. And it's something that's been very critical to me. And I think we can only progress forward with this, but it's the only way to make the system more equitable.
Yeah, and equity is definitely something that's lacking from the current system. I know I have been trying to train myself lately to stop calling it the criminal justice system and instead call it the criminal legal system, because the system that I'm familiar with, the system that I have seen so many of my friends and family and community members in the middle of, is not a system that's filled with justice. It's a system that's filled with injustice and inequity. And so it's only by making sure we have the right people in positions of authority over that criminal legal system that we actually change it. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you about was like COVID, right? Has had a huge impact on our courts. I don't think anyone will deny that. One of the things that I've seen here in Allegheny County, and I want to know about your experience in Center County, is that we had at the peak of COVID, the COVID outbreak here, we had so much confusion around, were people supposed to show up for jury duty? If it was unsafe for people to show up for jury duty, were we able to have trials? If we weren't able to have trials, were people going to sit in jail and rot for longer without even being convicted of a crime? So could you just speak to like how you in your role as a jury commissioner has addressed making sure that the jury system ran smoothly for the last year that we've been in a pandemic?
Yes, I can. And so what I can tell you is there are certain things that were without a little bit out of our control when there were emergency orders passed down from the state that the president judge, we have to adhere to what the president judge calls. So if there are certain trials or procedures that are canceled, we have to act in accordance to that. However, whenever we have been able to have jury selection, we have made a priority to have as many of them as possible and to have them very safely. So one of the things we did historically, they have always been in the Bellefonte Courthouse. That's our county seat here in Center County. And that's like many county courthouses, it's tiny. And so you can't have safe jury selection within the county courthouse. So we actually had worked with the county government. The county commissioners have worked on a contract with the Penn Stater here, and we got this major room, this huge room filled out where we could have jury selection there, which was pretty much all of the jury selections that I've been a part of so far. And so we were taking extra levels, working with the Penn Stater and working with county government to ensure that we could have as many of those as possible. Because again, we do not want people sitting in jail. Because again, like some of these people are probably innocent. And so we've definitely been making those efforts. And, I think we're definitely going to have our next one. Our next one, I believe, is in May. And so we're going to keep working towards that. But yeah, again, we really got put through the loop with this. But I'm really proud of everyone I've been working with to say, like, whatever we have to do to have selection, and do it safely, we're going to do it. And that's what we've been doing so far. And I think there has been a lot of transparency with it too. Like at the minute that we had details of what we could and could not do, we have been putting that out to the public. And constantly talking with jurors so they were aware.
I think that that's the one thing that government is lacking more than anything else is transparency. So I am just so excited to hear you say that, because I still to this day don't get information on how we're handling the jury selection process here in Allegheny County. And so maybe we need a jury commissioner here in Allegheny County as well. I would love to see that. Another question that I have is regarding when I know, and I'm sure you do, when we're out knocking doors, especially in our local races here in 2021, is that I have a lot of people who tell me that they don't vote or someone in their house isn't registered to vote because they're so worried that that will mean that they will end up on a jury someday. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's actually a very common misconception. You can end up on a jury without being registered to vote. They're not necessarily tied. I think that's really just a rumor. But here's the thing about that too, is that the summons process is entirely randomized. So regardless of whether you're registered to vote or not, you are somebody who you could be summoned. You could be someone who's summoned like every 5 years, every 10 years, or never at all. It's completely random. I speak with people every day about this, where I've had people reach out and say, hey, like I really want to serve on a jury, but I've never been summoned. Can you put me on a list? And it's like, we cannot legally do that. We have an entire jury database system. And when we pull summons, when we pull a list, it's randomized throughout the county, and that's it. And that's it again, like I am 28 going on 29. I have never been summoned yet. I want to, even though I'm curious to see how I'm gonna get probably recused immediately because but it's that is how it works. So but there is a thing. People think that their chances are more likely because they're registered to vote, that they're in a certain database, but that is just not the case.
Yeah, I tell people that all the time. I had no idea how widespread of a myth it was until I heard it on the doors time after time. Like, oh no, I don't want anything to do with voting because I don't want to be on a jury. First of all, I, like you, have been waiting my entire life to jury, having grown up watching Law and Order being my favorite show. And I only got summoned one single time and I was disqualified. But that leads me into another question. Are you able to serve on a jury? Like, could you, as jury commissioner, be summoned? And would you have to recuse yourself from the trial or recuse yourself for the time being as a jury commissioner? Like, how would that work?
So what I can tell you is it is a little tricky there. I think technically I could get through the summons process, or I could get through that process. But what would happen is if I were to be in the jury pool, like on selection day, the attorneys and judges would immediately say, like, do you have a relation? Do you know this judge? Do you know this attorney? Do you know anybody? And I would say, yes, I know all of you. And they would say, okay, you're done. So I would probably I could basically have my the other jury commissioner remove me in advance, but I would go. But that is that's what I know to be the legal standard, and also how I just logistically know how that would work.
I was wondering that. That's been at the forefront of my mind. Like, well, if you're a jury commissioner, what happens if you get summoned to be on a jury? So that is really interesting. I feel like I'm just going to ask my own questions until the question and answer portion.
Speaking of, we are at the question and answer portion. So I'd love to start incorporating some of these, and then absolutely get back to questions that you have for each other. But we did receive a few questions through the Jot form. We've got a few coming up through the chat. So starting off with a question from Laura's very own campaign chair, Betsy. And you can keep these remarks as pithy or as lengthy as you would like. Which of your accomplishments in your respected elected positions are you most proud of? And we can go ahead and start with Bethany.
Oh, accomplishments. So I would say my first accomplishment was just my election. I was the first person in the entire nation elected as an openly running as a formerly incarcerated person in recovery from substance use disorder. First person ever to do that, which I didn't even know at the time that was happening. And also, I'm the youngest person ever to be elected countywide in Allegheny County. So, that to me is an accomplishment as well. But I would say as an elected, my biggest accomplishment has really been my work around the jail. Specifically, since at the beginning of the pandemic, about a month in, I am also on the jail oversight board, which is so ironic because 5 years ago, I was in the same jail that I'm now on the jail oversight board for. So I understand the struggles of being incarcerated and how it takes a toll on not just the person who's in jail, but also everyone that loves them and everyone that has to try to support them from the outside. So in our May meeting, I introduced a motion to put $50 on the commissary account of every person in the jail. So that's used to buy phone calls to call home. That's used to buy prepaid stamped envelopes to write home. It's used to buy food because the meals in the jail aren't adequate. You can buy menstrual products on there, cleaning supplies because we're in a pandemic and they don't get cleaning supplies. And so it passed just by one vote in May, and then every month since it's been unanimous. And then in October, the folks in our jail got tablets, which sound great in theory, but they are very expensive. And there are a lot of people making a lot of money out there off of their use of tablets. So I added an additional $50 for use on their tablet account. So every month in Allegheny County, every person in our jail, which is around 1,600 to 1,700 people at any given time, are given $100. And so that's something that I just have heard from so many constituents who have loved ones in the jail that has really just taken a burden off of them, that they no longer have to worry about putting food on the table at home and supporting their loved one in jail. They now have us supporting them for that second part. So that's definitely my biggest accomplishment.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing. Laura, any your proudest accomplishment?
Sure. Within this office in particular, again, I think one of the biggest things was, I came into this office, I had a lot of ideas of how we were going to move this office forward, how we were going to progress, and put in new innovative strategies to just make the system more equitable and transparent. Now, of course, again, COVID hit literally I should say less than a month after I joined the office. And so, we were still doing what we could. But I think, one of my accomplishments is that I was still keeping all that in mind and working towards these goals while all of these changes were happening. And I think I have been successful in some things because a major thing is coming into the court administration and the judicial system in general is that you have to be constantly vigilant of explicit and implicit biases, not just amongst ourselves as jury commissioners, but within the entire system. And we have to be looking at that because if we're seeing that, where do we have to call this out? When is this happening? How is that affecting somebody else's case or anybody else that we're working with? And that I know personally, it takes a lot to say something and do something, but these are the critical steps that we have to take too to make any kind of reform possible. And I think my logo kind of stands for the outspoken nature of who I am. And so that is what I've been able to do. And I've also been able to just in general communicate more about what this office is and what the different departments within court administration do so that people are more aware of what's going on here. And so I think I would say I look forward to having many more accomplishments within this role, but I think these have been my main ones over the past year.
That is definitely like a lot to be proud of. This is a question specifically for Bethany from Ezra, our State College Borough mayoral candidate. Did you have a primary challenger, and how did you differentiate yourself and make your case to voters in Allegheny County? That's a big district.
It is a big district, the 7th largest legislative district in the nation. And so I did have a primary challenger. My race was actually kind of a primary only race. So for the at-large seats on Allegheny County Council, it's the 2 highest vote getters in the general win. Albeit broken, 2-party system, it's always been a Democrat and a Republican. So after I won my race in the primary, even though I was on the ballot against the Republican in the general, we both won, if that makes sense. I did have a primary opponent who actually sadly just passed away this past week. So that it's been a really rough few days, just, a lot of feelings and just remembering his legacy. He held this seat for 20 years. Allegheny County's current government form is only 20 years old. He was the only person that ever had this seat until I beat him in the primary. And it was hard. I would say the way I distinguished myself is I really ran on a separation of powers, that the county council, which is the legislative branch of our government, for so long was a rubber stamp on our county executive. And the person that I ran against, he was very on team county executive. And I said, regardless of how you feel about the executive, the purpose of checks and balances is so that the legislative branch is the check on the executive branch and vice versa. So that was definitely something I ran on, is I will be an independent voice who will vote how my constituents want me to vote, and not how someone in a higher position calls me and tells me how to vote, which was seemed like this radical idea at the time. But since, I think that people have been really appreciative that I have been that voice. I think also the other thing I ran on was just transparency, accountability, and accessibility. Like someone who had been in office for 20 years, everyone should know that person. Why didn't they? That we needed to just be our true, authentic selves. And I was so fortunate that in Allegheny County, I had some really badass women who ran before me, who ran as their authentic selves. Like, I am wearing sweatpants and a hoodie right now. That's how I dress all the time. I threw on some jeans and sneakers for the campaign, but I was myself. I told my story from the beginning. And I think as my authenticity caught people off guard at first, and I would see some jaws drop when I would tell my story. But then I think it got to be listen, I might not completely agree with everything that your platform says, but I appreciate your honesty, and I believe that you'll bring that to local government. And so that was really what I think did it for me.
Yeah, I love that both of you are so invested in, how you just said, being your true authentic selves, and we need more people like that in our government.
That's how Laura and I became friends, because we were both like that. That was literally how we connected. Is it's wow, there's more people like this out there in the world. I only had to go halfway across the Commonwealth to find it. That's cool with me, as long as it's there. So I appreciate that so much, and it's really what drew me to Laura in her first place, and why anything that she runs for the rest of her career, I am 100% on board. You have me saying that now, because it's just so refreshing to see. And I wish we had 1,000 Lauras in elected offices all over the Commonwealth.
And I wish we had 1,000 Bethany's.
So then our last question for the evening before we wrap up from Dan is for both of you. What has your best day in office been so far? And we can go ahead and start with Bethany.
I have no idea what my best day has been. I think that it was, can I say when I was on CNN? Because that was cool as hell. But I actually, it's either that or my first day, because I literally right now, just thinking about the day I got sworn in, I had no idea what the next 4 years were going to look like, right? So as Laura said, my entire elected office term has been in a pandemic, right? I got sworn in January of 2020, and then I think it was like March 13th, the pandemic, like that's when everything shut down. So I think that first day was the best because I was still like, what do they call it? Like bushy-tailed, wide-eyed, something like that. I'm bad at those, but anyways. I was still that on my first day. And since then, I have seen the inner workings of government in a way that I never have before. Since then, we got hit by a pandemic that no one could have predicted. And since then, it really has changed and also leveled the playing field. I think like there's folks who have been in elected office for 40 years who have the same zero experience of handling government in a pandemic as I did as a newly elected official. So I think that first day when I still like thought everything was going to be like smooth and like, oh, this is easy, anybody could do this, I really learned a lot, and it taught me a lot since about myself, because I realized how easy I was able to pivot from this laundry list of things that I knew I wanted to do when I got into office to immediately being able to be like, all right, listen, I have to change that list right now because people are getting kicked out of their houses and are losing their jobs and their insurance and can't put food on their table and kids aren't going to school, like all of this stuff. And so I would definitely say the first day because it was prior to all of that happening, and I've since learned a lot.
And Laura?
Yeah, I would just work with that and say, I think one of my, again, it's very difficult to pick a first, or, you know, one best day. But I think one of the best was probably the first jury selection that we were able to run post-pandemic, because that would have been my first real experience with it. And just that we were able to do it safely and soundly and work with everybody. I think all participants were really, grateful for that. But I would say this would not coincide with like one day in particular, but one of the things that just really is most worthwhile for me is actually the correspondence with jurors leading up. So from the initial summons process leading up to the actual selection day, I think there were many days intertwined where I just had personal, communications with jurors who had many different issues, and we needed to kind of evaluate every situation differently. And I think I was able to kind of bring the kind of empathy and perspective that they needed, to determine what was best for them, whether they could serve or not, anything like that. And, it just, so I would say it's more of just kind of an accumulation of those experiences, which doesn't totally answer the question, but it does it. But yeah, that's really how I would answer that.
Great. Well, we are a couple minutes over, but very, very much worth it. We heard such incredible insight from both of you. I personally love hearing more about what both of you do at any given point in time. So thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your friendship with us. And I look forward to our next event. Bethany, big hands to you. Laura, thank you so much for coordinating all this. And I think with that, we are going to sign off. So everyone have a great evening.
You too, Laura.
Thank
I'll
you,
see
Bethany.
you on the board. Let me know when we're not.
Yes.
I'll be out.
Thanks, you guys. That was wonderful. Good night.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Night, guys. Woohoo.
Cool. All right. And yep. Have a good night, everybody.